Of course, a psalm is a song that David wrote. And to really understand all of his psalms that he wrote, he didn't write all of them, but the ones that he did write, and especially this one, it helps to review what was going on in his life. Most scholars think that David was probably around the age of 15, maybe 14, no older than 16, when he had the battle with Goliath and killed him, and nobody was expecting that to happen. And he lived to be, most scholars think, around 70 years old. So let's just say from 15 to 70, for 55 years, there was always, every day just almost, someone wanting to kill David. For 55 years, one of his main struggles was to stay alive. And it goes like this. As soon as he killed Goliath, King Saul was no dummy. He realized this kid may be young, but he's got lots of talent and possibility. He's now popular. I need to bring him into my royal household, which he did. And then it didn't take long after that for him to realize the people, they like David more than they like me. And he got really jealous. And also, King David, apparently our psychiatrist would have field day with King Saul, not King David, King Saul. He battled depression. He really did a lot. And he discovered that music calmed him down, which music lovers know that, don't we? Certain types of music can get us from a deep, dark place back to where we want to be. David, in addition to being a brave young man, a skillful warrior, was also a skilled musician. He played some type of harp. He wrote his own songs. He sang his own songs. And so when Saul would get depressed, he would say, tell David to get his harp, come to my room. And David would sit and play the harp and sing. And I forget the actual words, but like the dark, oppressing forces would leave Saul's mind, and he would be healed for a while. So David became popular, and as Saul became more and more jealous, he finally came to the point where he says, I can't use this guy anymore. He's going to overtake my popularity. He's going to overtake the popularity of my sons when I die. I've got to kill him. And it talks about one time he asked David to come to his room and sing, and while he's there, he threw a spear at him and tried to kill him. And then David fled, and there were some people that were also like David who became kind of like his followers, and they went out into the Judean wilderness and up in the hills and mountains. And Saul not only sent men out to kill him, he went with them. He wanted to be there when he wanted to see David's head cut off and put on a pole. And so he went a long time in hiding. And finally, when Saul was killed in battle with kings of another land, of course, the prophet Samuel had already gone to David and said, God has rejected King Saul. And he named all the reasons that God had rejected King Saul. And he says, you are to be the next king, not Jonathan, his son, not even his other sons, you. And he had a ram's horn with olive oil in it, and he anointed David to be the next king. So when Saul was killed, Samuel went before the people and said, and Jonathan, King Saul's son, was also killed in the exact same battle. And he says, David is to be the next king. I have already anointed him. He was already popular. That wasn't a problem. But for all this time, from the time Saul decided to kill him until David became king, he was on the run. Saul was after him. And then once he became king, he did what all kings did. He strengthened the defenses of his country, and then he began to conquer the rest. Now, there are other people now wanting to kill David. The main one were the Philistines. Years ago now, they said, he killed Goliath. He was our champion. He was our main guy. We were humiliated. It's time for revenge. So for years, the Philistines were always figuring out ways to defeat Israel. King David, assassination squads, formal battles. During King David's reign, scholars tell us that there were at least 6, maybe 8 major battles that David had with the kings of other countries around, as he conquered those countries, as he expanded the kingdom God gave him. And then he had to hold on to all those kingdoms. There were always rebellions happening. There were always people being sent to kill David. And then he knew that there was, anytime you have a royal household, any king in any country, you're always suspicious. Who that's around me all the time would like to kill me and replace me with somebody else? So you had Saul, you had the Philistines, you had all these other countries that were after him. But the worst one, the most heartbreaking, there came a point where King David's oldest son, Absalom, decided, I can't wait. I'm ready to become king. So he started a rebellion to kill his own father. Now, of all the people that tried to kill David, this was the one that broke his heart. He expected all the others. His name was Absalom, and you can read the story of how he died and everything. But when Absalom died, it wasn't that David knew the threat was over. It broke him as a father. And when you read the scripture where he cries, he crumbles, he is destroyed, not only that his son rebelled, but his son is dead now. We know that the next king after King David was King Solomon, but he was like number 7 in line. He was never supposed to be king. So there were all these problems with David. So as we read this passage today, keep in mind that for most of his 55 of his 70 years, somebody was plotting, desiring, or actively trying to kill David. Psalm 37, verse 1. Do not fret because of evil men, or be envious of those who do wrong. For like the grass, they will soon wither, and like green plants, they will soon die away. It's interesting, that word fret. We don't I remember hearing my grandmothers use that word, or older ladies as I was growing up. I don't remember any, and the only time you hear the word fret used today, if somebody plays the guitar, and there's frets on the neck. We don't use that word fret very much. And I often wonder, why is it in our Bible? So I went to the Hebrew, and first of all, I went through all my other translations that I have, and almost every one of them has fret, or the word, one translation had the word worry. So I went to the Hebrew, and I looked it up. Hebrew doesn't translate the Hebrew word into English as either fret or worry. It's inflamed. That's weird. Why? Doesn't make sense. Do not be inflamed because of evil men. So I did a little study on that word, and what it literally means, and this is why the trouble you have with translating languages that are over 3,000 years old, it means to be worried or anxious to the point of being consumed as if by a fire. We are so worried, and we've talked about stuff especially in our Sunday school times that are very discussion-oriented. We talked a little bit about it today. We're always bringing up, in our prayer request time, things that are not just on our heart. They're weighing us down with stress and worry and anxiety. And God created us. He knows how we are. There are times in our life that we are just so, that's all consuming of our time and our energy. We can't seem to do anything else because this problem, this burden, and it's usually health or family or job related, it consumes us to the point where it's like we're being burned up from the inside out. And God says through David here, do not fret. Do not be anxious or worry to the point where it begins to destroy you from the inside out. Do not fret because of evil men. We live in an evil world, do we not? Our country has problems. Our world has problems. There are forces out there that we're just beginning to understand, or there are the forces that have uh, um, been active in our history, in American history, for 100 years or so, and we're just beginning to recognize what it is. But they're evil men and women, but there are evil forces that are using men and women who have given themselves over to those belief systems or those thoughts and desires for power and control and authority over all people. And they are in this lust, this battle for power. And so David says here, do not fret, do not worry or be anxious because of the evil men and women, evil forces we hear about on the radio or whatever you listen to, or the television, or whatever you read. We're aware of what's going on, and it's scary. For those of us who have children or grandchildren, you know, wow, if I'm lucky, I'll die before the worst happens. But then you've got children and grandchildren to where what's life going to be like for them? He says, and don't be envious of those who do wrong. We're all guilty of that. When I was a kid growing up, I lived in a farming community, the Mississippi Delta. Lots of cotton, rice, and soybean farmers. And remember one night at the supper table, I was complaining because one of my best friends, who was from a farming family, his daddy gave him a brand new car for his senior year of high school. And I've got some bicycle. I have to borrow your car. I have to schedule your car to borrow it. And my mama said, Charles, listen, I want to tell you something. My mama worked at a company that all they did was loan money to farmers. And she said, and that particular guy, I said, let me tell you something about him and his family. You think they're rich? They're not rich. They're this close to broke. He said, the company that I work for does all the loans for that farming family. Our company owns their land. Our company owns their tractors. Our company owns their barns. Our company owns the house they live in and the cars they drive. If they have 2 bad years in the row, they're moving to a rental house in another part of the state. They're not rich. And every time I read a verse like this, I remember that. Anybody that we see as rich, they can lose that money in an instant. Who was the rapper with the parachute pants? MC Hammer. I will also never forget a magazine. I was looking through a magazine, Newsweek or Time or something like that, some magazine at the time, and it was a photograph of him sitting in front of his house on the curb, and he was like this. And behind him was this massive mansion, cars out front, all that kind of stuff, and the caption underneath said, I used to own that. And the article was a story. He had become a multi-gazillionaire because of all the records that he sold and the concerts that he did. But he did what everybody did. Well, if I'm this rich, I got to have an entourage. So everywhere he went, everywhere he traveled, he had 10, 15, 20 people that went with him. And he paid them a salary. He took care of all their travel and lodging expenses and clothing expenses. And he had, I don't know if he had a good lawyer, a good accountant or a bad accountant, or he just ignored good advice. But within a few matter of years, he was broke. He had spent everything. He had all these millions he had earned and didn't listen to good advice. So when David says, do not be envious of those of evil men or those who do wrong, I'm thinking of rich people too. Those are lessons like that. And verse 2 says, for like the grass, they will soon wither. Like the green plants, they will soon die away. That reminded me of a passage, verse 2, reminded me of a passage in Isaiah. Verses 7 and 8, let me just read it to you. The grass withers and the flowers fall because the breath of the Lord blows on them. Surely the people are grass. The grass withers and the flowers fall, but the word of our God stands forever. David was saying, verse 2, like the grass, they, the evil people, those who do wrong, will soon wither. Like green plants, they will soon die away. And then the next 8 verses especially, they are he uses what is called imperatives. Now, I had to talk to my brilliant wife, and I couldn't think of that word. I said, Ann, what is it when there's a word that begins the sentence and it's kind of like a command? It's the sentence doesn't begin with a noun or with just a regular normal sentence. He said, oh, those are imperatives. I went, thank you. So I wrote that down. Let me explain this now. Let's start with verse 3. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and enjoy safe pasture. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in him, and he will do this. He will make your righteousness shine like the dawn, the justice of your cause like the noonday sun. Be still, some translations say rest before the Lord, and wait patiently for him. Do not fret when men succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes. Refrain from anger and turn from wrath. Do not fret. It only leads to evil. Now, 3 times in verses 1 through 8, it uses the words, do not fret. And several weeks ago, I did a sermon on God's use, what I think is God's use of repetition in the Bible. If you're reading a passage, there's a word or a phrase that is used way more than normal, many times in a short chapter or just a chapter. There's a reason God did that. He's wanting us to sit and take notice of what we're reading. And here in these 8 verses, 3 times it says, do not fret. I think that's important. And then he has these imperatives. Now, so what is imperative? Like we were talking about Miles today in his new job, his daddy was, and we're all thinking about our first jobs when we have a real boss and not just parents. When they say, do this before your shift ends, you better get it done. When they say, I need this report by Tuesday, you better have that report in. And you can tell by the tone of the order and the person you've gotten to know as your boss, you know when they give instruction in a certain tone of voice and a certain way they look at you, they mean it. And that's called an imperative. When God says trust, delight, commit, be still, refrain, those are imperatives. He has a reason. He wants us to take notice. These are direct commands. They're not suggestions. They're not, if you have time to do this. They are direct orders, and he's doing it for our good. He's not trying to be the ugly God, the mean God. He's created us, and he says, I know what will work in your life, Charles, if you will just listen and read my word and obey and then trust me. All these things where we trust God instead of people. We trust God instead of culture. We trust God instead of what society says we ought to do. What has God said for the centuries and centuries and centuries? The Old Testament and the New Testament have been in existence. And we read, and after a while, you've been a Christian, you look at your life and you're going, wow, this stuff, right. God is right on this. People never change. We're all human beings at some point are selfish, rebellious, don't like authority, don't like being told what to do. We want to do our own thing. We're not willing to pay the price when we do our own thing. But God is simply to trust me. Delight yourself in me. Commit your way to me. And all these words, they're powerful words. Commit. That's not just, I'll do it if I feel like it, or I'll do it if I see a reward coming to me soon. Commit is that life-changing agreement, that thing that I will do, I promise I will do, and I will follow as best I can, because God, who created me and loves me and knows me better than anybody, says if I will commit myself to do this, he will bless. And he says, be still. We talked about this today. Douglas, I think you were one of the ones in that conversation, how hard it is to sit and be quiet and be still and think about maybe what you're reading, or think about what happened that day, or just quietly pray to yourself and just don't try to talk and listen to what God wants to teach you. There is a song that I want to recommend. It's called, I think it's called Be Still. Yeah, Be Still by a group called Love Song. 4 words, Be Still, Love Song. Look it up on your streaming service. I'll look it up on YouTube. It is a powerful, powerful song. So just exactly about what God says. Every time in his word, he says, be still. Trust me. The song was so powerful that as I was going through YouTube one day, I found a formal orchestra with a world-renowned singer singing this song. And it wasn't a Christian orchestra. And it wasn't, to my knowledge, I don't even know if the lady that sang was a Christian or not. But it was as powerful to my spirit listening to them sing that song as it was the first time I ever heard it 50 years ago. Be Still by Love Song, try it. And then he says, refrain from anger. Do you know what's the hardest thing for me to do? Is to refrain from anger. There's a lot, and I'm sure we all do, there's a lot of things that happen in our lives that we don't like, not so much to us. When I see something happening to my community, my family, my friends, my church, my world, this is bad. This is destructive. This is against everything God has ever taught. And we're being told by society now to shut up, keep your opinions to yourself, you narrow-minded believer of myths and fairy tales. Who are you to tell us how to live our life? Well, no, I'm just telling you what God said about how to live your life. He's the master of it all. He designed everything. He's the expert. But refrain from anger and turn from wrath. Do not fret. It only leads to evil. There's another verse. Let's go to verse 9 and continue this. For evil men will be cut off, but those who hope in the Lord will inherit the land. A little while. I wish they put the word just, like in just a little while. That's the Charles Norton paraphrase. And the wicked will be no more. Though you look for them, they will not be found. But the meek will inherit the land and enjoy great peace. I thought that sounds familiar to another verse I know in the New Testament. Something about the meek. Where is that? What is that? Oh, yeah. It's in the Sermon on the Mount. Let me read this in Matthew chapter 5, verse 5, where Jesus says, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. And I got to thinking about that. You know, I wish they had picked some other word besides meek. I don't like that meek. Why do you and I not like the word meek? Why do we respond with kind of a standoffish, maybe even negative? Because in our society, as the English language has developed, the word meek means can be stupid. It can mean weak. It can mean worthless. It can mean invisible. You don't see people if they're meek. It means silent. That's not the biblical definition of meek at all. As a matter of fact, when I did some research on it, there are really kind of 2 ways the Bible uses the word meek. One is that, first of all, there are people that God himself, by his decision and his actions, he has made them humbled, where meek people are people who have been humbled by God, and they didn't want it. They were prideful. They were rich. They were of a great reputation. They were famous. They were celebrities in their own time in God's word. And it says God made them meek. He humbled them. He defeated them because they were living their lives or leading the people or setting bad examples, and he wanted it stopped. So he made them meek in the sense that he humbled them. But the other way God uses humble is that people who choose to be humble. You have examples of adults around when you're growing up. They're not loud. They're not proudful. They're not boastful. They stand for things they believe in. People respect them. They're trustworthy. They're not going to cheat you. They're not going to hurt you. They're not going to make somebody else suffer if it makes them look better more important or popular. They choose human. And one of the lessons, characteristics of a Christian is supposed to be humility and humbleness. So we're not to be boastful. We're not to be evil. We're not to be cheaters. We're not to be egotistical. God says when you choose to not make yourself important, I will bless you. I will use you to accomplish great things in your life, and you don't want to get notoriety. You don't want to get hero of the year or nicest guy, nicest woman in the neighborhood. You're doing it because you feel this is the way Christ lives and the way he wants me to live as a humble, meek in a good way, loving follower of Jesus. Verse 12 and 13. The wicked plot against the righteous and gnash their teeth at them, but the Lord laughs at the wicked, for he knows their day is coming. I'm a history buff, so I go back and I read I love reading about all the evil people in the world who, you know about Hitler and Stalin. I mean, you can go all the way back through the different Caesars through the land. All the bad people, all the people that history says these are bad people, these are evil men and women. Their day came. They may have had riches for a while. They may have had power for a while. And they abused those riches. They abused those power. They did bad things to millions of people. And God took them out. He let them flourish for a while, and then they were gone. And that's the message to us in this passage here, that their day is coming. If we choose to be a follower of Jesus, we will choose to study Jesus and his characteristics and imitate them in our lives. The humility is just a part of it. The love, the forgiveness, the patience, all what Paul called the fruit of the Spirit are all characteristics of Jesus, and they're hard. We try to do them ourselves. So we ask God, don't humble me in a bad way, but help me to be humble. Don't humble me publicly, but help me to be more like Jesus. And so that in a roundabout way is what Jesus is saying. I want to come back to one passage that we began with, the do not fret. Verse 1, do not fret. Verse 7 and 8 both say do not fret. When I was growing up, there was an older woman in my family that for her, I think she had a tough life growing up, because for her, the glass was always half empty. If something was going to happen to her, it was going to be something bad. She worried to the point where I think it made her sick. It changed her whole outlook on life. And so I would, as I got into my 20s or whatever, I moved away from home and away from being around her a lot. I would call her every now and then, check up on her. And I'd call and I'd say, hello, and I'd say her name. And I'm not exaggerating, at least a third or a fourth of the time, as soon as I would say, hello, this is Charles, she would go, what's wrong? I said, do you know something I don't? Why do you think something's wrong? Well, in your voice sounded like something was wrong. I went, no, that's just me. And I would chide her. If something's wrong, I'll tell you. But I'd call every third or fourth time I'd call, she would say, Charles, what's wrong? So finally I thought, I'm going to teach her a lesson. So I'd call her, and she'd go a couple phone calls and not do it. But the next time she did that, well, I'd say, hello. And she'd go, what's wrong? I said, well, I got killed in a car wreck today. I'm just calling to tell you I'm dead. Bam! She threw that phone down. I didn't call her for about 3 weeks. She was but she knew why I did it. I had asked her, why, in so many words, why are you like this? Why do you always assume the worst possible situation and outcome? Why are you so negative? Don't you believe God loves you? I'm summarizing months and years of conversations. So she never did that again when I called her. I could tell she was wanting to so bad. But anyway, it was All that whole experience. God has used all the experiences of our life to try to tell us, Charles, I'm in charge. I love you. Are you going to go through some bad things in life? Yes, you are. Are you going to bury people that you love, but when you think it's before their time? Are you going to have tragedies and suffering? Are relationships going to be destroyed? Yeah, a lot of bad things are going to happen. You're human. There's sin, the reality of sin. You know all this, Charles. You were raised in Sunday school and church. Trust me. Hold on to the fact that I love you, I'm in charge, and at some point in the future, you will be blessed for all this. So I say that in summary to all of us today. As we live every day one at a time, hope for the best, pray for the best, work for the best, prepare for the worst, and realize that God's in charge. He loves us, and He'll get us through things. We may have scars. We may have physical scars, emotional scars, psychological scars, spiritual scars, but in the end, He simply says, I love you, trust me. Let's pray. Now, before we began today, I asked two people to close us in prayer, Doug and Gail. So, Doug, you go first and you close, and then Gail will finish too.